The sky that morning was not cloudy. On the contrary, the sun spread its light over the town as if it did not realize that something important was happening there. Perhaps the world really was indifferent to small everyday tragedies. But for Alina, that morning was the end of her life and the beginning of a wait that she didn't even know would last so long. He woke up early, long before the roosters crowed. I couldn't sleep, not that night, not knowing that it would be the last night I would spend with Aleksandr before he left for the war. His suitcase was already packed in the corner of the room, and his uniform rested folded on the chair. There was a thick silence between them, a silence that carried fear, promises, and everything that cannot be said out loud. "You're going to come back with me, right?" she asked softly, as she helped him put on his coat. The question was almost a plea, but she tried to sound strong. Aleksandr did not respond immediately. He simply looked into her eyes for a long moment. That was the type of look that wanted to engrave a face in the soul, as if the eyes were the last camera before oblivion. "I will," he said with forced finality. "I have to go back, because I have you waiting for me." She smiled, but her eyes were already filling with tears. They weren't married yet. The war had interrupted the plans. The white dress that she had embroidered with her mother was still hanging, waiting for an altar that would not arrive soon. While they were eating breakfast, almost nothing was said. They had their hands on the table, hugging each other tightly, as if that touch could stop the passage of time. But time did not stop. The clock on the wall read 7:40 when they heard the sound of the military truck approaching down the dirt road. The dogs barked. Some neighbors looked through the windows. It was the second wave of soldiers to leave that month, and Aleksandr's name was on the list. Alina ran to the room, took out an envelope and handed it to him. "Don't open it yet. It's for when you miss him too much." He smiled. He put it in his coat pocket and without saying anything, hugged her long, hard, and desperately. There was no longer time for elaborate promises or oaths of eternity. There was only that moment, and it had to be worth all the others that might never come. At the station, the tracks shook under the weight of the approaching train. Families crowded together. The women cried. The children grabbed their parents' legs. The train whistle cut through the air like a sentence. Aleksandr handed his file to the officer and turned around one last time. The eyes searched for Alina. She stood there, standing firm with a painful smile on her face, holding a white handkerchief. He greeted. She waved back. "Wait for me," he whispered, already standing at the carriage door. And then the train left. She ran alongside the tracks for a few meters, unable to take her eyes off him. The wind blew her hair. Her handkerchief fell from her hand, and her feet stumbled on the gravel. But he didn't stop until the train disappeared around the curve. When everything was silent, she remained there, alone, in the middle of the station. The tracks still vibrated, but Aleksandr was now just a dot in the distance. Life, from that moment on, would be marked by a before and after of that day. She knew it. And so, before leaving, he wrote with trembling fingers on the wooden bench, "I'll be back when he comes back." And so the wait began. The days after Aleksandr's departure were absorbed by a silent routine, full of small gestures that Alina turned into rituals. Every morning she swept the garden as if she expected to see him walk through the door at any moment. Every night he lit a candle near the window, believing or hoping with all his might that somehow that light would guide him back home. But what really kept her alive were the letters. The first one arrived a month later. The envelope was wrinkled, the seal had military markings stamped on it, and the handwriting, his, was shaky, as if it had been written between the bumpers of transport or under the dim light of a candle in a camp. He didn't cry when he read it. She smiled. Those words brought Aleksandr back, if only for a brief moment. "My Alina, my home. It's cold and noisy here, but I close my eyes and hear your voice calling me. I keep your letter in my chest pocket, close to my heart. It has been my refuge. I promise I will return. I promise I won't forget the smell of your hair, even for a day. Yours forever, Alex." From then on, writing became a sacred act. Alina sat at the porch table every night, with paper, ink, and her heart beating with longing. He talked to her about the simple daisy harvest that was going well, the cat that slept in his chair, the neighbors asking for news, but also about what he didn't tell anyone, the fear, the emptiness of the house, the silence that hurt like a fever. "Today I dreamed about you," he wrote. "We were in the wheat field, running like before. You laughed and called me your girlfriend. I woke up to the feeling of your kiss on my forehead. I can still feel it. He signed them all with "For my love that time does not erase." Then, he folded it carefully, put it inside the lavender-scented envelope, sealed it with wax, and went to the station to hand it to the postman who dispatched military mail. I knew some might never make it, but he wrote anyway. Writing was resisting. During the following months, the letters became a bridge between two worlds, that of waiting and that of war. He collected his envelopes in a wooden box that Aleksandr had made years before. Every time the pain of absence was too much, Alina would open that box and reread the words, like someone reciting a prayer to not lose faith. But she wasn't the only one waiting. Aleksandr, on the other side of the continent, was counting the days to get answers. His battalion companions laughed at him, calling him the poet, because he dedicated his few free hours to writing with an almost religious devotion. He read Elena's letters as if they were talismans. He folded them carefully, put them in his uniform pocket, and touched them before each mission. "Imagining you waiting for me makes me stronger," he once wrote. "Every word of yours is like a thread that ties me to life. If I survive, it will be thanks to you. If I fall, I know it was because I loved you until the end." And so, the months turned into a year. Alina began to decorate the envelopes with small dried flowers. I wrote poems in the margins. Sometimes she included old photographs, hoping he wouldn't forget the contours of her face. Aleksandr corresponded with doodles of what he saw in the field, drawings of his companions, songs that he invented with nostalgia in his chest. Each letter from them was a miniature universe, fragments of love in times of destruction. But then, little by little, the responses began to become sparse. The postman no longer had that sparkle in his eyes when he delivered the envelopes, and Alina, although she continued writing, felt a chill in her soul every time she returned from the station without news. His words began to have more silence between the lines, more pleas than descriptions. "Aleksandr, are you okay? Just say that. If you have to, say that you still remember me, that you're still mine, even if it's in thought." But there was no response. The last letter he received from Aleksandr was in January. In it, he said he was tired but hopeful. He talked about wanting to return in the spring, that he dreamed of seeing her in her wedding dress, in the field where they met, who heard his name in the morning winds. "No matter how long it takes, Alina, the altar is still ours. I will be back, I swear." But it was the last one. After that, silence. She continued writing, daily, even no response. Because love, sometimes is that, continuing to send letters, even when the world doesn't respond. The house where Alina lived seemed to have stopped in time, not because of a lack of movement, but because everything in him existed for one purpose: to wait. Each object carried the weight of a present absence: an empty chair, an always clean glass waiting to be used, the frame of a portrait that never left its place. The days passed, the same, as if they were copies of each other. In the morning she tended to the flowers in the garden, Aleksandr's favorites. "White and violet chrysanthemums, flowers of resistance," he said. Alina gently watered them, almost as if she were touching them with the same hands she used to touch his face in her dreams. Then, he made coffee with the same recipe as always, the one he liked the most. The details never changed. The bread heated in the wood-fired oven, the jam made from last summer's harvest. I set the table for two, even though I knew they would only touch one dish, but he left the other one there, because love that waits also needs gestures, no matter how vain they may seem. The wedding dress, the one she embroidered with her mother, was still hanging behind the bedroom door. Sometimes, when the wind blew and the door opened, the dress swayed gently, as if dancing in the breeze. Alina avoided touching him. I just looked. When the longing hurt too much, she would sit in front of the dress and close her eyes, imagining the church, the bells, the music and her steps entering to meet her at the altar. One of the most painful parts of his routine was his weekly visit to the train station. Every Friday, without exception, Alina walked there, with the same slow steps, the same coat, the same white scarf tied to her hair. The postman didn't even ask his name anymore. He simply looked into her eyes and silently confirmed what she already knew. No new letters. Still, she didn't stop going. Hope is not measured by logic. She followed him, as if fulfilling a silent vow. "I will be back when he comes back," was still written on the station bench. The ink is almost erased, but alive enough for those who still believe. Inside the house, Alina kept Aleksandr's room intact. The books in the same place. The clothes were folded the way he liked. The military hat hung from the wall post. She cleaned his room every week, with the delicacy of someone touching a living memory. He didn't let the dust accumulate, because deep down a part of her still believed that he could open that door at any moment. At night, I wrote. Even with no response, even with the words weighing heavily, Alina continued writing as if each letter were an unfinished conversation. There was something sacred about this ritual. It wasn't just about writing to Aleksandr. She was writing for herself, not to forget, to not erase the sound of his voice in your mind. The neighbors commented, some with pity, others with impatience. You need to get on with your life. Poor thing, they said. But Alina didn't listen. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. For her, moving on would be admitting that he wouldn't come back, and she wasn't prepared for that kind of goodbye. There was a time when some friends tried to introduce him to other boys. A widowed doctor, a retired teacher, a distant cousin of a distant cousin. All good men, but she never looked at them the way Aleksandr did. He never felt with any of them what he felt when he received a letter from them, even if it was old, wrinkled, and smelled of dust and war. Once his younger sister asked him, "What if he doesn't come back, Alina?" She responded with a firm voice, but with teary eyes, "Then he will live here, until my last day." And he pointed to his chest. Time passed. The war continued. The radio brought distant news. Sometimes names were read, soldiers who fell, soldiers who returned, but never the name Aleksandr. Routine became faith. Faith in the form of waiting. Faith in the form of silence. And the most impressive thing is that, even without any letter, even without any confirmation, Alina never stopped. He never stopped writing. I never folded the dress. He never cleaned the table. I never closed the room. The routine of waiting became part of who she was. And perhaps, in the process, Alina became more than just Aleksandr's fiancée. It became a symbol of love that does not give in, of hope that does not give way, and of fidelity that survives time and oblivion. Because, sometimes, that's what love is. Continuing to live each day as if the person was still going to come back, and wait, even when no one else believes. Autumn ended without warning, as if it had been chased away by the icy wind that heralded the arrival of winter. The town was covered in a silent white. The leaves fell as if saying goodbye one by one, and the mornings began to dawn without birds, only with the creak of the wood as it shrank from the cold. In Alina's house, winter was not just a season, it was a metaphor, because the cold that spread through the windows, through his hands, through his feet, was the same one that began to freeze hope in his heart. The letters had stopped. First, they were spaced further apart. A month without a response, then 2, 3. Still, she continued writing, but over time, even the postman himself began to avoid her. Not out of cruelty, but out of compassion. Giving up emptiness is a painful act, and I already received it every Friday. None today, he said. With his eyes downcast, Alina smiled slightly, pretended to be strong, thanked him, and returned home with measured steps. That winter he began to walk more slowly. The hands were colder, the look more lost. And yet, there were fresh flowers in the garden. Her room was still intact, and her dress was hanging. Inside him, doubt began to blow like a sharp breeze. He died, and no one had the courage to tell me. It was a thought he struggled to push from his mind, but it always returned early in the morning when the wind howled through the cracks in the house. On the first Sunday of heavy snowfall, he wrote, "Today the silence weighs more than the cold. I tried to imagine your face, but I was afraid because I couldn't remember the details. Am I erasing it? Aleksandr, does this happen when we love so much, or when we start to lose?" The fear of being forgotten was as cruel as the fear of never being found again. And that winter, Alina felt both seeping into her soul like frost on rooftops. Little by little, the gestures that were once so careful began to repeat themselves like an emotionless echo. I lit the candle, but no longer out of faith, just out of habit. Coffee was served, but without the smell of hope. He would sit on the porch to write, but his fingers would tremble and his pen would fail. Many letters from that winter were left unfinished. They started with my love and ended with a blank sheet of paper. What was once a routine of love slowly turned into disembodied grief. People noticed. Some came to visit her and offered her advice that sounded like phrases. It's been 2 years, Alina. You have to accept it. No one comes back from war after so long. You're still young. You may still have a life." She listened to everything with polite silence. But inside her, it was like they were screaming, tearing away what was left of her belief. Because no one understood. It wasn't just a weight. It was fidelity to the last word, to the last promise, to the last look. He gave her at the station. "You're coming back to me, right? I'm leaving. I have to go back, because I have you waiting for me." These phrases echoed every night, mixed with the noise of the wind and the creaking of wood. And maybe that was what kept her going, the sound of that promise not spoken in vain. One cold January afternoon, Alina had a dream. Aleksandr was walking along a snow-covered road. He was dirty, thin, but with lively eyes. He stopped in front of her, held out his hand and said, "I tried to come back, my love. I swear I tried." He woke up with a wet pillow and his chest hurt. He spent the whole day without speaking. That night he did not light the candle. For the first time he left the room in darkness. The candle that always symbolized the way back was forgotten on the table. The winter continued relentlessly. The days were short and the twilights were long. The town fell silent early and Alina began to sleep less and less. She walked through the house like a shadow, listening to sounds that only she heard, feeling presences that only she perceived. Sometimes I swore I could hear his footsteps on the porch. Other times I could smell the smoke from the pipe he used. But when I opened the door, there was only wind, absence. That winter stopped being absence. It became a company, and yet she didn't give up, because Alina was made of a rare kind of love. A love that, even wounded by time and silence, did not die. I fell asleep waiting for the thaw, waiting for the letter that has not yet arrived. If this story has touched your heart so far, then you know it's not just about war and separation. It's about what keeps us alive when everything seems to have stopped. And if you felt something, even if it was a chill, reciprocate that moment with a simple gesture. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Every click of yours helps us continue telling stories that deserve to exist, that should be felt. And get ready, because what comes next changes everything. The next part reveals the letter that Aleksandr wrote, but that Alina never received. A role forgotten by time, which could have changed the destiny of 2 lives. Stay with us. The tide is about to turn, and you'll want to be here when it happens. War, with all its brutality, not only destroys cities, she interrupts the stories, cut promises in half, and sometimes he does it with something as small as a forgotten envelope. On a battlefield lost between old maps and forgotten trenches, Aleksandr felt time slipping through his fingers. The winter on the front was cruel, but the silence coming from Alina was worse. It had been months since he received her letters. Maybe the messages were being intercepted. Perhaps they had been lost in the chaotic corridors of war. Or, perhaps, she had given up on him. That last thought was eating him up inside. That morning, with his fingers numb from the cold and his eyes cloudy from sleepless nights, he decided to write one last letter. But this time it was different. It was not an everyday letter. It was the letter. The one you write when you're afraid your next breath will be your last. The one who carries everything that has never been said and everything that cannot be left unsaid. With the pen shaking in his hand, he wrote, "I'm Alina. If you are reading this, it is because fate has betrayed me. And yet, my greatest wish is that these words find you, that they reach you, that they hold you when I can no longer. I fought with all my strength to return. In every step, in every shot, in every freezing night, it was you who kept me standing. You and the memory of our garden in bloom, of your laughter, of your white scarf fluttering in the station. Do not cry, my love. If my body falls, know that my soul leaves in peace, because it was loved by you. Loving you was my most sacred mission. And if one day life offers you another chance to smile, please smile, even without me. Smile for both of us, with all that I am, or was, yours forever, Aleksandr." He folded the letter carefully. I kissed her, and he kept it in the inside pocket of his uniform, close to his heart, next to the first letter that Alina sent him at the beginning of the war. The plan was simple. As soon as possible he would deliver it to the messenger who would come that week. But the war never respected the plans. The next morning, the base was attacked. The smoke, the screams, the chaos, everything mixed in a scene of loss and urgency. Aleksandr was reported missing in action. They never saw him again. I'm not even alive, not dead. No official confirmation, no certificate, no body, just a suspended absence, and the letter. It stayed, lost in some military warehouse, in a forgotten trunk among papers, obsolete weapons, and ownerless objects, catalogued as unidentified personal item. Nobody ever gave it away. No employee located her in time. She didn't cross borders. It didn't reach their hands. It was never read. Meanwhile, Alina wrote. He wrote with faith. I wrote with pain. He wrote with his soul. But Aleksandr, who might have found comfort in knowing this, never received his final words. Two lovers united by pages that never touched. The world continued. The war is over. Governments changed. The station has been renovated. The uniform was forgotten. But the letter remained, silent, folded, intact, in an envelope with his name written in shaky handwriting. Alina Mirova. To open if I don't. Come back. Decades passed. Alina, now with white hair and wrinkled hands, continued writing. Less, it's true. But he still spoke to her thoughtfully. Never married. He never left town. And always, as he passed by the window, he looked at the horizon as if something or someone could still return. She never knew about the letter. I never knew Aleksandr had tried it, that he had written everything, that he had thought about her until the end. She just felt it. And maybe that's why he never stopped. Waiting. There was a sound that everyone in the town recognized before they saw any sign. The squeak of the old bicycle's wheels sliding across the stone floor. This is how Mikhail, the postman, appeared every day among the trees on the dirt road, with his worn leather bag, his always wrinkled coat, and the attentive gaze of someone carrying much more than papers. Mikhail was a simple and quiet man, but he had a sensitivity that only those who deal with cards know. I knew that sometimes, inside an envelope, there was more than words. There was news that could change a life forever, and no one knew it better than him. Because no one expected a letter as much as Alina. Since the beginning of the war, he had seen her at the station. First on Sundays, then on Fridays. Always on the same bench, with the same white scarf in her hair, her hands in her lap, and her eyes scanning the road, even before the bicycle appears. In the first few months, his heart was pounding, and when he handed her the envelope with Aleksandr's name on it, she smiled like a girl at a party. But time passed. The cards started to get weird, and every week that Mikhail arrived empty-handed, I saw the light in his eyes go out. Still, Alina never missed, always believing that, one morning, he would have the letter that would change everything. The postman's routine, for many, was just a job. But for Mikhail, each delivery had its weight. He knew the stories behind the last names on the envelopes. He knew when a letter brought comfort, when it brought pain, when it brought hope. He did all this in silence, as if it were part of the job. With Alina, it was different. He couldn't look her in the eyes without feeling a lump in his throat, because although everyone in the town had already accepted Aleksandr's absence, she still kept the table set. I still watered the garden. He still perfumed the letters. I still lived as if tomorrow I could get back what was taken from me yesterday. Nothing today, he said, in a low voice, and she, always with a half smile, responded, maybe next Friday. He never had the courage to say that there might not be a next one, that perhaps Aleksandr had been just one of the thousands lost between trenches and bureaucracies, because there was something in the way Alina looked at the road, a silent faith that not even reality dared to contradict. Once, in the middle of winter, with the wind biting his skin and the snow piling up on the sidewalks, Mikhail was late. The bicycle had broken down, and yet, arriving at the station 2 hours later than usual, it was still there. Session, freezing. Wait, he offered her a ride home, and on that silent ride, she spoke for the first time about her fear. What if he wrote it? What happens if the letter is lost? He said, with teary eyes. What if he left thinking I forgot? Mikhail didn't say anything, but that night, it took him longer than usual to sleep. He spent hours thinking about the many letters lost during the war, those that were lost beyond the borders, those that never arrived because fate decided to be cruel. I knew that among the bags, deposits and boxes forgotten in the military mail, there were stories waiting to be read, and maybe, just maybe, Elena's story was one of them. With the end of the war, the movement of the people changed. The soldiers who returned had already rebuilt their lives. Many got married, others left. Mikhail continued his work, delivering invoices, advertisements, and some personal notes. The cards, over time, became rare. But there was still one, only one, that he hoped to achieve. An article by Aleksandr. It never arrived. It never appeared on their routes. And he, little by little, began to accept that perhaps she would never exist. But Alina, no. Even when there were only worthless papers in the leather bag, she greeted each of Mikhail's arrivals with the same care as before, as if each visit could be the one. And, out of respect, affection, and a fault, that was not his, Mikhail never stopped stopping by, even when there was no delivery to make. Because the real postman doesn't just deliver the mail, offers presents, he delivers hope. And sometimes he carries what no one else can carry: silence. On each visit, every Friday, the ritual was repeated. And Mikhail, the man who learned to read the hearts of the hands that received the letters, knew that somewhere there was a pending story, an undelivered letter, an unfulfilled promise, and a woman who was still waiting. Most letters written during the war never found their recipients. Some were intercepted, others censored, and many were simply lost in the labyrinths of military bureaucracy. And some, like Aleksandr's, lay dormant in places no one remembered existing. Decades have passed since the last correspondence between Aleksandr and Alina. The town has changed, the roads have been paved, the faces have aged. But in a former military warehouse hundreds of miles away, time seemed to have stopped. It was a forgotten building, about to be demolished. Walls covered in moss, broken tiles and boxes piled up as if they housed the rubble of a past that no one wanted to move anymore. It was during the final inspection when it all started. Anna Morozov, a young 28-year-old librarian, was on duty at the Institute of Historical Archives. Their job was to identify any documents with heritage value before the building was destroyed. And although he expected to find only administrative records, military drafts, and emotionless lists, he found something different. It was a chest, small, made of darkened wood, with corroded hinges and the number 208 etched in faded paint. Inside, wrapped in aged cloth, were about 50 letters, all with different names. Everything never delivered. Most had no set date. Some didn't even have a return address. But one caught my attention. It was a yellowed envelope, but still firm. The military seal intact. The cursive, handwriting, shaky but clear. In the center, handwritten in ink that time has not managed to erase: Alina Morova, to open if I don't come back. Anna stopped. His heart raced. There was something in that handwriting, in that silent care with the words, that seemed to contain something more than ink. It was as if that document, even after so much time, was still waiting to be read. With trembling hands, he read the contents. When he finished, silent tears ran down his face. There was a man in love, exhausted, on the verge of death, but full of words that overflowed with life. It was an endless goodbye, a love that resisted time, silence, and war itself. How come a letter like that never arrived? He murmured, feeling the weight of that story fall on his shoulders. Upon returning to the Institute headquarters, Anna couldn't get Alina out of her mind. He needed to know if that woman was still alive, if there was someone in the family, if only that letter, so powerful, so human, could still fulfill the purpose for which it was written. He began a discreet search, delving into old records, population censuses, archival documents from the town where the letter should have arrived. He discovered that Alina Morova, until a few years ago, was still living in the same house where she had spent her youth. There were no marriage records, there were no children, there was nothing but time accumulated in silence. Anna called the local administration. A lady responded. Yes, Elena was still alive. He was 94 years old. I lived alone. He received visits from the town doctor once a week, and sometimes she was seen sitting on the station bench, that same wooden bench where, decades before, she waited for the postman. When he hung up the phone, Anna felt her heart sink. The letter was not just a document, it was a reunion suspended for almost a lifetime. The next day he left for the town with the envelope in his hand. The road was long, the sky was cloudy, but there was an urgency. In every kilometer, something inside her told her that she couldn't wait any longer. That, perhaps, there was only time for one last chapter. When he arrived at the town, he felt that he had entered another era. The houses were small, old, with flowers in the gardens, and clothes hanging on clotheslines that swayed in the wind. In house number 12 he found a wooden door with peeling paint, but with an impeccable flower pot full of violets, Aleksandr's favorites. Anna called after a few minutes. The door slowly opened, and there she was, Alina, aged, yes, but with a look that still carried an old hope, as if he knew that one day something would happen. Anna didn't know what to say. He simply handed her the envelope. "It's yours." Alina took it gently. He recognized the handwriting even before reading it. His eyes filled, but his expression was not one of surprise. It was a meeting. He placed the letter against his chest. He closed his eyes. He wrote it. "So," he whispered. And for the first time in decades, there was no more silence. Just a sigh of relief, a paper in hands, and time, finally bowing before a love that refused to be forgotten. Alina remained still for long seconds, with the letter against her chest, as if the paper carried the heat of a long-lost body. His eyes, moist, did not reflect surprise. They reflected mute recognition, as if all those years he had been waiting for exactly that. And now that he was facing what he had dreamed of, there was no longer a rush, just a sacred silence between two times. Anna, standing in front of him, didn't know what to say. She felt that this moment did not belong to her. She was like a visitor at an altar, and that's why he didn't interrupt. He simply observed with respect and amazement the reunion between a woman and the part of her life that time tried to bury. "I always knew," Alina whispered, breaking the silence. "I don't know how, but I knew he wrote it. I felt it all these years. What I didn't know was that this letter was still alive." He invited Anna in. The house was small, organized, and seemed full of memories. Black and white photographs on the fireplace, a photo frame with dried flowers. A white dress had been hanging in the same place since the 1940s. Everything there seemed intact, like a personal museum of waiting. "Do you want me to read it to you?" Anna asked, in a tone that mixed care and reverence. Alina hesitated. Then he shook his head. "This letter must be read over. Time, all the time," he said, sitting down with difficulty in the chair on the balcony. "But maybe I need company to open the envelope. Not because I'm afraid of what I'm going to read, but of what will happen inside me after that." Anna nodded silently. He sat next to her, both of them looking at the horizon, as if waiting for something to emerge from the fog. "Do you remember the last time you wrote to him?" Anna asked, in a low voice. Alina closed her eyes. "Yes, it was winter. My fingers were numb and the paint barely flowed. But I wrote it anyway. I told him that even though there was no response, I still loved him. That if he had gone, it would still have been worth it to have loved someone like him." "Have you never been married?" Anna asked, although she already knew the answer. "No," Alina responded with a calm that once seemed to have been sadness. "Because it already belonged to someone. And I don't say that as someone who waited forever. I say this as someone who has never stopped being full of a feeling. Love is not just being together. Sometimes it means staying, even when the world says it doesn't make sense anymore." Anna lowered her eyes. In front of that woman she felt small, touched by a strength that did not come from youth, but from a life sustained by fidelity, courage, and tenderness. "How did you find the letter?" Alina asked. Anna told everything: the warehouse, the trunk, the registry. And while she spoke, Alina looked at her with the serenity of someone who finally sees the thread that sewed destiny return to the correct needle. "You were the bridge, my dear," he said. "And there is no more beautiful mission than being the bridge between someone and the truth that never came." Alina then ran her hand lightly over the envelope. "I haven't opened it yet." He simply caressed it as if he felt Alexander's fingers on the other side. "You don't know how much this letter gives me back," he said. "She won't bring it back to me, but he gives me what I needed to close the story with his words, and not with the silence of war." The two remained there until late in the afternoon, in silence. The sun began to hide behind the mountains, painting the sky a nostalgic orange. Alina, for the first time in a long time, seemed whole, not happy, but serene, like someone who finally understands that true love, even if hurt, was never in vain. When Anna stood up to say goodbye, Alina took her hand. "Thank you for giving me back my time. It was lost, but now it's back, even if it's on paper." Anna left with teary eyes, carrying with her more than documents and files. Now he had a story etched on his chest. The story of a woman who loved so deeply that she resisted decades of silence, sustained only by an intuition that his love still spoke, even if it was in a low voice, at some point in time. And now, finally, he had heard that voice again. Alina didn't see herself as someone who expected, at least, not in the way others thought. For her, waiting was not a prison. It was a choice. A silent way of staying true to something that never died inside her. And perhaps that is why, over the years, it has become a living portrait of a bride, without an altar, but with love to spare. Now, at 94 years old, Alina no longer walked with the same firmness. The steps were short, the hands trembled, and the voice oscillated between lucidity and oblivion. But when he spoke about Aleksandr, a glow appeared. Not in the eyes, already tired, but in the soul. That was where he still lived. The house where he lived was small, but it housed a whole universe. There was a type of organization that only those who lived decades as a sole company are capable of cultivating. Each object, they are told, a part of the story. The wedding dress, still hanging behind the bedroom door, already yellowed, but intact. The letters she received from Aleksandr, neatly stacked in a wooden box lined with embroidered cloth. And now, among them, the recently delivered letter, late is the one that never came. The final piece. It was strange how that envelope, forgotten for so many decades, seemed to belong to that space, as if it had always been there. As if time had waited for the right moment to give it back to him. Alina got up early every day. She made an effort to dress well, even with no one to visit. There was perfume. He would give him a blowjob that Aleksandr gave him before the game. She used to say to herself, "You won't see me for the last time as someone who gave up. He will see me as the woman worth coming back for." And perhaps this conviction was his salvation. The reason why he didn't get lost in loneliness. Because even without him, she still lived for two. In the town, everyone knew her. But over time, his name became a metaphor. The bride I was waiting for. Some saw her with sadness, others with admiration, but no one could fully understand what she felt, not even his closest friends. She wasn't bitter. There was no bitterness in her. He didn't complain about life. On the contrary, she was grateful. He always said, "I was lucky to experience a love that many will never know, and just for that, it was all worth it." There was something sacred in the way he touched Aleksandr's things, not as someone who preserves relics, but as someone who still feels life in them. The military hat hanging by the door was still cleaned every week. The chair where he used to sit on the porch remained untouched. And when the wind blew hard, making the dress flutter behind the door, Alina smiled to herself, as if he entered the room with that same calm step and that same look full of promise. With the arrival of the lost letter, something changed. It was not a break with the past. It was a seam, as if, finally, a cycle had been completed. And that did not erase the absence, but he filled the void with meaning. She didn't read the letter right away. It took days. He simply let the envelope rest next to the bed, touched it when he woke up, whispered soft words at night, as if asking for permission to enter that territory of words that had been latent for decades. When she finally read it, alone, on a cold afternoon, no one witnessed the moment. But when she walked out into the garden hours later, something in her had changed. There was lightness in his steps. The hands were still shaking, yes, but not from fear, but from relief. The kind of trembling that occurs when a soul finally finds peace. That night she wrote a letter. Latest, "My Aleksandr, my love, now I know, now I understand. You tried, you wrote to me, you didn't let me." The letter came late, but it came. "And I will not die without an answer. I will die for sure. Don't cry for me. Dear, my life was not empty. Because I loved you, because I kept you. And now I can rest knowing that you left loving me. It's enough." He kept this letter in the same box as the others, sealed, but no recipient, because she knew, when she was gone, someone would find her. And, just as Anna had been the link between the past and the present, someone else would continue the story. Because Alina wasn't just an old bride. She was the living representation that love, even in silence, even in loneliness, even in absence, is still love. And waiting, when done with all your heart, is not a waste of time. It is honoring what is worth it. The letter rested on the wooden table next to the bed, as if waiting for the exact moment. It had been there for days, but Alina knew that there were letters that could not be read in a hurry. Those words emerged at the end of Aleksandr's life, and would be read at the end of hers. It was a cloudy afternoon. The wind blew gently, making the curtains dance lazily. The light came softly through the bedroom window. illuminating the antique furniture, the wedding dress still hanging, and Elena's eyes already worn, but still deep. He sat up on the bed with effort, placed his back on the pillow, and picked up the envelope. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the kind of tremor that precedes a reunion. He gently broke the seal. The paper was aged but firm. The smell of time was still there, and perhaps, along with it, the smell of his uniform, that of the battlefield, the never-complete farewell. Elena took a deep breath and read it. I'm Elena. If these words reach you, it is because fate took my body, but not the desire I had to return to you. If this letter reached you, it is because I tried. With everything I was, I tried. I tried to return. I tried to survive. I tried not to leave you alone. And although the world was cruel to me, I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I write from a place of no guarantees, where tomorrow is just a wish. But even in this chaos, you are my lighthouse. I keep your first letter close to my chest, like a prayer. And now, I write the last, with the same ink of the soul with which I lived our days. I don't know if I will come back. I don't know if I will see your face again. But I carry with me the sound of your laughter, the warmth of your hand in mine, and the promise I made to you that day at the station, that I would return. And if I can't return with my body, I will return now with these words. Because a love like that does not die. I know that many will tell you to continue, that they will try to fill the space I left. But I ask you, with all due respect, if one day you smile again, smile freely. Do not carry the blame. Because I loved you so that you live, and not so that you shrink. Thank you for every letter, every memory, every loving silence. If I leave, you should know that it was like your man, having loved you with everything a man can give. With all the eternity that is in me, yours, Aleksandr. When she finished reading, Elena didn't cry, she smiled. He closed his eyes and placed a paper on his lap. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of peace. For the first time in decades, he felt like the missing words had finally arrived. They weren't just partying words, they were words of affection, delivery, of liberation. She stood up carefully. He went to the bookshelf and picked up the box of letters. He placed Aleksandr's letter on top. Then, he walked towards the garden, the same one he praised so much in his letters. He sat in the wicker chair under the tree where I used to see him reading on old afternoons. The sky now showed shades of grey and blue. The wind was calm and there was the smell of wet earth in the air. He put his hand on his heart and whispered, "Now I can breathe fully." Elena was no longer just the woman he expected. She was the beloved woman until the last day of an absent man. She was the fiancée of a soldier who didn't return, but who wrote. And that was enough. Because to her, what had not been said for decades had now been whispered. And nothing hurt like before. In the days that followed, anyone who passed by the house noticed something different. Elena continued walking slowly. He still wore his old brooch, but the look had changed. He carried a new tenderness, a relief that could not be explained. She continued with her routines. I watered the garden. She adjusted her dress. But now, he did it not out of expectation, but as a tribute, because late reading was not the end. What was missing was delivery. It was the link that united the past and the present in a single truth. Love resisted. Love defeated silence. And finally, it was delivered. Elena reread Aleksandr's letter several times in the following days. At first quietly, "Just for you." Then, murmuring the words like someone praying, like someone who wishes they would turn into wind and touch the chest of the one who wrote them. But there was one part of the letter that never left his mind. It was the easiest part, and, at the same time, the most devastating. "If I go, forgive me for not coming back." It pierced Elena like a sweet sword, because he hadn't just stopped coming back. She knew that his absence, though inevitable, would be a pain she would endure. And, even in the face of his own death, he was worried about not hurting her more than the war already had. "Forgive me," he wrote, as if loving hadn't been enough, as if the fact that he left made him feel regretful, even though he never had a choice. Elena, rereading those words for the fifth time, felt something collapse inside her. It wasn't sadness. It was a kind of liberation that came when they completely understood each other. When you see that love sometimes fails not because of weakness, but because of fate. He sat on the porch with the letter in his lap and wrote a response. I knew no one would read it, but some answers are not made for the eyes. They are made for the soul. Aleksandr, mi amor, you don't owe me forgiveness. You never did, because I never blamed you. Not when the silence of the post office became my only companion. Not when the years passed and your name stopped being spoken in town. Not when I doubted my own memory trying to remember your voice. Even in your absence, you were a presence. Even without letters, you were a word. And even without returning, you never left me. I forgive you, yes, but not for not returning. I forgive you for having carried, even in war, the weight of my pain on your shoulders. For having written those last words with guilt when what I deserved was peace. You were everything I dreamed of. And now that I have your goodbye in my hands, I can breathe for both of us. You can rest. I'm fine. And I love you, not despite your absence, but even in it. He folded the paper and kept it with the other letters, as if that one too should be preserved over time. It was his way of responding, to ease the hearts of those she believed, with all her being, were waiting somewhere beyond what the eyes could see. After that, Alina changed little things in her routine. He stopped going to the station every Friday. For the first time in decades, I no longer felt the need to wait for someone who wasn't coming. And not because of disappointment, but because, finally, it had arrived. He began to take care of himself more. I drank Aleksandr's favorite tea, not as a souvenir, but as a celebration. He ran his fingers over the pages of the letters as if he were playing music. And once, when a boy from the village approached her and asked her why she kept so many old letters, Alina answered smiling, "Because they are alive. Each one of them breathes a piece of him and me. And now that you are all with me, I can say, I am complete." The letter that never arrived became the most valuable letter. The absence that marked her throughout her life was replaced by a new feeling, gratitude. Not because love won with a happy ending, but because, even with everything against it, love existed, and it was enough. And the forgiveness she offered to Aleksandr, even without him being there to hear it, healed something inside her. Something old, silent, hidden behind the always kind eyes. The smile that hid the pain. The silent faith that continued to burn like a candle in the wind. From then on, Alina began to talk about him with new serenity. No more with the pain of those who lost, but with the peace of someone who understood. And this peace, now, was in every corner of the house. In the photo above the fireplace. In the flower that grew by the window. In the dress that, although never worn, carried the shine of a story that no one else would dare call incomplete. Because Alina, finally, had understood. To love is to allow yourself to leave and forgive, even when love cannot keep its promises. And Aleksandr, wherever he was finally able to rest, knowing that the woman he loved so much not only expected it, but understood it. The morning she decided to say goodbye, Alina didn't cry. The sky was clear and the sunlight entered through the kitchen window with a different softness, as if even time had understood that that day demanded respect. Alina slowly got up, put on the blue coat that Aleksandr liked, the one he himself had chosen in a distant autumn, and tied her hair up with the white scarf of her youth, the same one he greeted at the station when he left for the war. There was no sadness in his gestures. There was calm. There was a silent certainty that something was about to come to an end, but unlike what he experienced for decades, this time the ending didn't hurt. It was necessary. Before leaving, he walked to his room and opened the box where he kept the letters. He only separated two, the first that was sent to him from the front, and the last, the one that arrived late, but not in vain. He kept both in his coat pocket, along with a small dried lavender flower. Then, Alina left the house and walked towards the station. The same path as always, the same stone path, but now, with lighter, almost floating steps, as if your feet were finally being guided by something greater than waiting. Liberation. When he arrived, he sat on the old wooden bench. The paint was worn, the marks of time stamped on each chip. It was the same bench on which he had written, with trembling fingers, more than 70 years ago, "I will return when he returns." He ran his hand over the inscription. It was still there, toned down, yes, but live, like her, like the love that was born there, grew, and now it's gone. From his pocket, he took the letter, the one Aleksandr wrote in the last few days. He read it again in silence, teary eyes, but firm, and then he carefully kissed the envelope, folding it tenderly. "You're back, Alex. You're back as you promised. Not how I imagined it, but how it should be." he whispered, as if praying. Then he took out his own letter, the one he wrote in response, even without an addressee, and placed them both in a small wooden box. He buried the box right there, under the earth next to the bench, between two ancient trees that had witnessed the arrival and departure of so many. It was not a funeral of pain, it was a ritual of liberation. Elena slowly stood up and looked at the footprints. They still glowed in the morning light, and for the first time in many years, he did not imagine Aleksandr coming from afar, waving from the window of a train. For the first time, she simply smiled and let the image fade, because now, Aleksandr was already at it, in the words he wrote, in the forgiveness he asked for, in love that, even interrupted, was completed in silence. Upon returning home, Elena went out to the garden and cut some violets. He placed it in a small vase, next to the frame with the photograph of the two of them. It was an old image, blurred by time, but you could still see Aleksandr's smile, young, hopeful, passionate. He lit a candle, and she sat on the porch, surrounded by the smell of flowers, old wood, and lavender in the air. The peace he felt was so intense that, for a moment, he closed his eyes and let himself be carried away by a new sensation, that of having fulfilled his story, that of not having left a single word unsaid. When neighbors passed by, they waved. She waved back. Some later commented that there was something different about her that day, a soft shine, a serene fatigue, like someone who had already reached the end of a long journey and could finally rest. That night, Elena slept early. The letters were safe, the fragrant garden, and the wedding dress, now, no longer seemed to be waiting. It seemed like a symbol, a reminder that some promises do not need to be fulfilled in the time of men, because love has its own time, and the very way of returning. The next morning, Elena didn't wake up. He left with the same gentleness with which he lived the last few years. No problems, painless. I just left. As if he had been waiting his whole life for that moment of reunion. And when, finally, he felt that Aleksandr was at peace, he was able to go to meet him. In the bedroom they found a note on the table. He's back. Now, I'm the one who's leaving. With love, calmly, and with him. It was the end, but also the beginning of something that could no longer be touched by time, distance, or war. It was the last goodbye, but a goodbye full of reunion. The most powerful stories are not necessarily the ones that end in happy reunions. Sometimes, the most striking are those that were never completed in the time of men, but that found, in the eternity of words and memory, the appropriate space to flourish. The story of Elena and Aleksandr is one of them. From the outside, you could say that their love never came true. After all, there was no wedding, no return of the soldier, not even a last hug. But for those who understand the language of silences, of gestures that resist the years, and of words that arrive late, but still on time, it is impossible to deny this loved one. He won the war, which tried to silence him. He defeated death, which tried to interrupt him. Time won, which tried to erase it. Aleksandr's last letter did not arrive when it should, but it came when I needed it. And that was enough to firmly seal a truth that Elena carried throughout her life, that to love is to remain, even in absence. He is loving, even without a response. It's waiting, even when everyone is gone. And when that letter was finally delivered, the story was not only closed, it became eternal. Today, Elena's house remains standing. The local community turned it into a small memorial, not because they asked for it, but because its history became impossible to ignore. In the bedroom, the wedding dress is still hanging. In the garden, the violets continue to bloom, and on the balcony, the chair where he read the letters rests in the shade of the tree, as if it still heard whispers from the past. On the table, a frame contains the phrase he wrote in his last letter, "I love you, not despite your absence, but even in it." Visitors from all over the country come to learn the story of the woman who waited for love, not to receive back what she gave, but to honor what she felt. Children listen to the story like someone listening to a legend. Young people are moved by the bravery of someone who hastily refused to love, and the elderly recognize themselves in the serenity of those who understand that love does not need witnesses to be real. But it is not only the letters that preserve this history, it's Elena's gesture, the choice not to forget, the decision to continue lighting a candle even when everyone said it was useless, the courage to continue writing even without a response, and, finally, the wisdom of recognizing, with the letter in hand, that love, even interrupted, had fulfilled its role to transform. Aleksandr did not return as he had promised, but he came back in words, and that, for Alina, was enough to close the cycle in peace. And that's where the true power of this story lies. Because his love is not only in the records, in the letters, in the porch chair. It's everywhere someone is still waiting, where someone writes, where someone believes that a promise is worth keeping, even if the whole world says otherwise. And so, the story of Alina and Aleksandr spreads like a seed in the wind. Feed other loves, inspire other expectations, reconcile other hearts over time. Because love, when it is true, does not need witnesses, it simply needs to exist. And if he is true to what he feels, he survives. Survive the war, survive absence, survive oblivion. And one day, even though it was late, they found it. In letters, in memories, in tears that flow when someone emotionally reads words written decades ago, but that seem to have been written today. This is the eternity of love. And that is why Alina, the bride who never received her last letter on time, is still remembered. Because your story reminds us that love does not depend on time, he just is. And when it is, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop you from continuing. If you have come this far, it is because this story touched something inside you. Maybe it reminded you of someone. Perhaps it awakened an old longing, or even revealed the power that exists in loving with abandon, even without guarantees. Stories like this are not common. They remain with us after the last word, silently transforming us. And therefore, if this narrative has reached you in some way, it corresponds. Leave your like as a gesture of gratitude for a story that deserved to be told. Share with someone that you need to remember that true love does not depend on time. And subscribe to the channel so that other stories like this one can continue to be told, full of soul, pain, beauty, and hope.